And so, we are now at the French Riviera of CoteD'Azur, also known as the Monaco GP circuit. So, after 2 races, pretty much the results I would have expected from both me and the Alfa Romeo. It's pretty clear to say that no one else is really going to be doing the winning aside from me. And before we do anything else, I'm just going to check my setup to make sure everything is as it should be. Yep. Got the hard tyres, don't really need any of those. Sports suspension, that's there just in case. And yep, that's all good. I do want to keep the traction control on so I don't understeer too much. Of course, I probably will have a lot of understeer anyway, but here we go for race 3. Don't need to qualify. We know the car is fast, so let's go and do it. As we are driving for 99 laps around Monaco. And there was actually one time where the Monaco Grand Prix did used to be 100 laps long. Back in the day. I think it was around the late 20s up to the up to the late 60s when they had Monaco being, I believe it was 100 laps. And we are just 10 miles away from reaching 500. Then we'll pretty much be halfway there. And as I would have expected, already making a fair share of passing manoeuvres early on. Probably knew that was coming. And now all that's left between me and the lead is the Mini Marcos as we head down through Casino Square and now slotting our way through Mirabeau as we are now heading into the Lowe's hairpin up the inside. And getting a good exit out of there, now heading through Portier in 2nd gear. And maintaining speed through 2nd Portier, and now as we head through the tunnel, we are now heading down into the harbour chicane. Almost a little late there on the brakes, but able to get there just in time. As I now head up the harbour straight and now into Tabac for the first time. And now we are into the swimming pool section. Something that has ultimately been here since the 70s. And now we head into Le Rascasse. The final 2 corners of the lap, and looks as though this is probably going to take at least 3 hours for me to get through, as already I have built up a huge lead, and I have on my first lap a sub 2 minute 10 as I head through Sandevot for the first time, now heading up the hill into what I think is La Massenay for the second time, and heading past the hotel, the Grand Hotel, and now down into Casino Square for this straightaway for the second time, and through Mirabeau we go once again. As I now head into Lowe's hairpin for the second time, and now through Portier, and heading under the bridge, and now heading through the tunnel. As I would suspect, my lap times will pick up as the tyres get a bit more rubbered into the track. Braking a little earlier this time, as I head through the chicane. And now up the harbour straight again with the luxury yachts. And through to back for the second time. And now we head through the swimming pool section once again. And yep, into the wall on the exit of the pool bus stop section. And now heading through La Rascas for the second time. And up the bus stop straight we go. As the lap time I set this time is virtually 9 seconds up on my first lap. So I reckon before the end of this race we are definitely going to see a few sub 2 minute lap times from what I can see. But you know what? I think I'll be okay with that. I think if I remember correctly, I couldn't tell you precisely who the first winner at Monaco was, but I know that Damon Hill's dad, Graham Hill, technically did earn the nickname Mr. Monaco, because it was, ironically, where he had most of the success over the course of his career. He basically was Mr. Monaco for his era, because he won here 5 times in the 60s. And at the time, Graham Hill, a lot like Damon was at one time, he was technically one of the best. There was one time where Damon, a lot like Graham, was one of the best drivers in the world. Although sadly Damon never did manage to win here at Monaco, because he was either involved in a skirmish or he was simply just outpaced by probably Michael Schumacher, if there was anyone. Well, him aside from Senna, of course, who does have the most wins here at Monaco. And I do just manage to set a sub 2 minute time with a 1:59.9. And that is the first sub 2 minute time I have set today, as already I have a 42 second lead over the Mini Marcos. And this I can confidently say is where the field is going to get very strung out, as it's already happening and we're only 3 laps in. But either way, we seem to be doing pretty well for now, as we head into Lowe's hairpin once again. But yeah, I mean, Graham Hill, as I said before, he did win here 5 times. He basically was the master of Monaco with its virtually original layout prior to the course itself, getting the modifications that it got in the 70s and then the 80s. Because the chicane there at the end of the tunnel straight, that used to be just a flick. Before, I think it was around 1986, when they basically tightened that chicane, and in some cases made it easier to go around. Because I think there probably were a few big accidents that took place at that original chicane flick as it was. And I think on this lap, that is when we are going to see us hitting the 500 mile mark. And now my best lap time is a 1:59 flat. Not bad. And we're probably going to be seeing at least a few more sub 2 minute times before this is all said and done, and we're just 1 mile away from reaching 500. So I think that tells me in this race we're virtually going to be driving about 200 miles, is what I would say, or just over 200 miles in this race. But yeah, I mean, Graham Hill, and that is now the 500 mile mark. So we have done good. And the Mini Marcos is still in second for now, but I think it's only a matter of time before the Alpha eventually does take over second. As we now head through Tabac once again, and up to the bus stop section, that is the swimming pool, with these 2 chicanes. And it looks as though from here, like, I have pretty much got all the answers. And no one is really going to contest me for the lead at this point, because my car is that much faster than everyone else, basically. But yeah, there have been a fair share of well-known movies that have had their scenes here at Monaco. I think there was also GoldenEye that had one scene here at Monaco as well, even though it was technically at Casino Square where they made that scene. The film, by the way, was GoldenEye. But yeah, Monaco has had plenty of famous movies here along the way, and I also believe there was even, I think it was one of the Herbie movies that had a scene here, that had a Monaco scene as well. Although then again, I would say aside from a racing movie, that was also a bit of a romantic comedy as well. Because, well, I think the film was called Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo, but I don't remember for sure. I would have to look it up to be sure. I might do that when I get to the halfway point. As after 5 laps, or nearly 6 laps I should say, the Fiat 500 is now 1 lap down. And it's looking more and more like this race is very much going to be uncontested, a lot like the others. But again, Monaco is a very technical circuit. It doesn't really require me to come up with any setup tweaks. It basically just requires me to go about as fast as my heart's content, or thereabouts. But either way, I know this track isn't decided on speed, it's mainly decided on cornering precision, as I am proving here. And now, we seem to be doing pretty well. As I head through Lowe's hairpin, and now into Portier for the 7th time. I know there was definitely a Herbie movie that was made here in Monaco. And of course, they did also have a scene in racing movie classics, as I would call them, as I now put the Honda S800, his first lap down. So I think we're going to be on course to lapping the Fiat, I would say, at least 16 times. And the Honda S800, he'll probably be overlapped about, I would say, he'll be overlapped about 14 times. Just as I would have thought, we're very much strung out at this point. And it looks like this is pretty much the way the field is going to stay. And I think the Alfa Romeo is now just about to put the Marcos one lap down. Sorry, the Alfa Romeo is looking for a pass on the Mini Marcos. That'll probably be the only real action you see today. As I now close in on the Volkswagen Karmann Ghia to put him one lap down, so I think I'll probably be on course to putting him at least 12 or 13 laps down. As I look for a move up the inside, and I get it. So that is now half the field overlapped, and at this time, I'm not sure if the Marcos is still in second position, but if he was, then he was definitely doing a good job for a while. Oh no, yep. I would have thought the Alfa Romeo was almost certainly going to pass him for second. I mean, the Alfa clearly is the better car over the Marcos anyway. I don't think that really would have been a contested battle. Still, it was nice to at least have a battle for second while it lasted. So you know, there is that. As I am now putting the Mini Marcos one lap down, trying to see if I can keep it clean through Sandevot. Not quite clean enough, but either way it doesn't matter because, well, I still overlap him in the Jag. And now we are closing in on the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint. And that's a wall. That's probably going to slow down my lap time just a little bit, but I reckon because I have the pace to really go out and go long on this tank of gas like I did before, I reckon fuel is going to be no such problem, from what I can see. So through the tunnel we go, I emerge in the tunnel behind him, and then as we come out of the tunnel, I put him one lap down. No doubt in saying the slipstream probably helped with that, but I still succeeded in putting him one lap down. As we now head through to back for the 9th time, and through the bus stop section we go with the swimming pool. I'm probably on course to putting the Alfa Romeo at least 14 laps down, although it'll more likely be 12 laps down from what I can see, depending on the number of pit stops. I don't think this is going to be a sub 2 minute time, but I still made a good recovery by overlapping the field, and so we are now onto lap 10. we're pretty much well into the 500-mile mark, so from here, all I really have to do is make sure that I hold on to my position. And that's a little bit deep there, but then again, understeer is something that I naturally come to expect. I probably didn't need the traction control on, but the only reason I have it on anyway is because, well, I want to make sure that I'm not getting any wheel spin on the tyres. And at this stage, we look to pretty much be in a league of our own, as we are very much leaving the pack far behind us. And I've gone too deep into to back, but that's okay, because it's only minor contact. And still running wide, but either way that's fine, because I don't need to set sub 2 minute times all the time. I just need to make sure that I somehow put together good enough lap times to the point where I know the pace is going to be valid. And I'm getting a lot of understeer at the moment, but either way, it's probably because my front tyres do seem to be getting some wear on them. And my fuel is only down 2 bars, but I think I should be okay to manage it from here, because I really don't think there's going to be too many issues regarding fuel flow. I think we're pretty much sorted in that department, because I'll only really need to make, I think, 1, maybe 2 stops for fuel. I really thought for sure I was going to sneeze for a moment there, but amazingly I didn't. So heading through the harbour chicane once again, and still continuing to battle the understeer, but either way, I still seem to be putting together some good consistent times, which is what I want. I reckon this is probably going to take me 3 hours to complete. Opera Paris was clearly the shortest race, and from what I can see at least, I think Nürburgring is going to stay as the longest. Because while Nürburgring, that took me 3 hours and 40 minutes to get through. But these other races, they have not felt anywhere near as long, and I've gone too deep again. I think it's fair to say the understeer is definitely giving me issues now. And I think it's only going to be a matter of time before I have to pit. Although thankfully at least, the surface here is not quite as abrasive as it is at the Nürburgring. It's probably a similar level of abrasion. I think that's a word. It's probably a similar level of abrasion to the one that you get at Opera Paris, because, well, both city courses are technically in France. Although Monaco itself is technically a principality, but whatever. So, Yeah, there is that. And 3 of my 4 tyres are very much wearing out at this stage. I think it's only a matter of time before my left rear tyre does get some of the wear as well. Very much looking like it will probably get some wear and tear before too long, as I am very much battling this car at the moment. But we'll wait and see what happens. So, yeah. And I've gone too deep into the corner. I seem to be getting a lot of understeer at the moment, and it's probably not too surprising either, so I think I can maybe go 1, maybe 2 more laps on this set of boots, depending on just how long it is before I really need to change, as I've now put the Fiat 500 a second lap down. It only took me, I think it was 10 full laps to overlap the field, and my car right now is all over the place. So I definitely need to pit either on the next lap or the lap afterwards, depending on just how destroyed my tyres are. Because my tyres at this point are just getting shredded. And I even got overtaken by the Fiat as a result of my understeer problems. I mean, it doesn't seem to be on the corner exits where I'm having all the problems. It's on the corner entries. Which means the front tyres aren't exactly wanting to go where I want them to go. And that, in a sense, is what understeer essentially is. If I was getting oversteered, then it would technically mean that I'm running wide on the corner exits and not so much the corner entries. I think I can probably do 1 more lap on this set of boots from what I can see, so I think after that is when I definitely need to pit. Because if I don't, then well, my tyres will pretty much be shredded to ribbons. So I am prepared to tough it out for 1 more lap if that's what it takes. So I will either consider pitting this lap or the next lap. I do want to try and see if I can manage to nurse my tyres as long as they can possibly go before all of them just get shredded to ribbons. I am willing to be the risk taker if that's what it takes. I mean, I highly doubt the Fiat is going to catch up to me at this stage. I am very much nursing my car at this stage. So I think this probably is the lap where I will have to pit, or else my pace is just going to continue dropping off. Oh, did not mean to press the handbrake there. That was a total mistake. Yeah, it definitely feels like I'm having to jerk the wheel just to quite literally keep it moving, and yep, my front tyres are dead. Okay, I need to pit this lap. There is no way I can do another lap on this set of boots. My tyres ain't worth shit at this point. I need to pit, and I need to pit now, or else I'm just gonna continue crashing. Okay. It's basically pit now or bust. That's basically what this is. Because I cannot go another lap on this set of tyres. Plus 3 of my 4 tyres are basically shredded anyway, so I need to pit. Refuel? No. Not yet, anyway. It'll just lose me too much time. Right now I just need tyres. No gas. Contradictory to that pit stop scene from Cars, it's basically a case of no gas, just tyres. I should also mention the actual pit exit at Monaco. That's a bit more complicated to get around, because you are having to navigate your way through a pretty complicated pit exit, because it's longer, and you've also got to be quite gentle with your car as soon as you basically rejoin the track after Saint-Devote. You've basically just got to, quite literally, nurse your car as you come out on the pit exit, and I went on the curb for some totally benign reason. But anyway, now putting the Fiat 500 a second lap down again, and it's probably going to stay that way until I put in his third lap down. It's pretty much back to business as usual, and it's also a case of me going back to the old grind. So from here, I think the only thing I really need to do is just make sure that I get to the end of this one, and then we should be in a good spot from what I can see. And the only reason why I am doing the full championship at this point is because, well, I basically need to do the full championship if I am going to get my replay shots. And my corner entries are not really getting better at the moment. I'm still going too deep into some of these corners. Might also be because my tyres are still relatively cold. And yes, cold tyres will play a part. And yes, under the circumstances, cold tyres will play a part when it comes down to the handling of your car. I can assure you that is something that happens. And I have seen at least a few instances of drivers crashing because they were on cold tyres. I should know because I have seen a few of them. But yeah. So we made our first pit stop after 14 laps, and as I would have guessed, my front tyres as well as my right rear tyre are already taking in most of the wear and tear. But the left rear tyre, I'm actually not seeing as much. So I think it's pretty much on the other 3 tyres where the wear and tear seems to be mostly prevalent. But either way, I'm still managing to pertain to my dominance. And I honestly doubt anyone else is really going to get close, as the Alfa Romeo has now put the Fiat 500 one lap down, and I was only a 10th off on that lap from potentially going purple. That definitely could have been a purple lap time if I was just a little bit faster. I could have potentially broken to the 158s. That is very possible from what I can see. As we head past the Grand Hotel once again, and now down into Casino Square, and through Mirabeau again, on what is the third lap of my second stint, and through the Lowe's hairpin once again, the globally recognised Lowe's hairpin, and somewhere I have actually been to myself as well. There is actually a picture of me sitting on that inside wall at the Lowe's hairpin somewhere. Even though it was a long time ago since I actually went to Monaco. It's been less than a decade at least since I went to Monaco at that time. I think I can also seem to recall someone with a Ferrari actually being caught in the shot as well, if I'm not mistaken. I seem to recall that being the case. But yes, I have actually been to Monaco. Even then, if it was mainly for... Even though it was mainly for a summer cruise at the time, and, well, as much as I do enjoy travelling the Mediterranean, I'm not entirely sure if it's really one point in my life I'd want to repeat, because, well, I think outside of that visit to Monaco, I did have my fair share. I did have my fair share of problems at that time. And there was at least a 2-year period where I think it was from about mid-2016 up to mid-2018 when I did actually go through a phase... When I did actually go through a phase of just being angry. And I was like that most days, but I have since gotten over it. As much as I would really like to go and visit Monaco again, in terms of my original visit, however, and considering everything I went through at that time, and not just with the aforementioned anger issues I had at that time, I think it's probably one period in my life that I honestly prefer to just, well, I prefer to leave it in the past. Because it's not really worth talking about when you know it's something that really didn't make you happy. Oh, is this going to be a new best lap time? Yes, it is. A 1 minute 58.3. Nice. So we're now breaking into the 158s. And it looks like at this point we have definitely got some solid pace out of our Jag. I should also mention the last Herbie movie they made was in 2005. Or released anyway, because, well, there was the... I'm trying to remember what the film was called. I know it was a Herbie movie, but I'm trying to remember what it was called. Oh yeah, Herbie Fully Loaded. That's what I was thinking of. That was I think the final Herbie movie they officially made, and there haven't been any real mentions of Herbie ever since. And yes, to those of you who were fans of pop culture in the 2000s, you will know that the main star of that movie was the then teenage superstar Lindsay Lohan. Someone who you probably know very well for Mean Girls. And I think they did also recently make another Mean Girls movie as well, if I'm not mistaken. I was pretty sure I heard something about that. And I set another sub 1 minute 59 time with a 158.7. So 530 miles is how much we have now driven, and we are now virtually a fifth of the way there. Or we will be as soon as we get to the end of this lap. Which means this race is probably going to take somewhere just over 3 hours. I would say at least 3 hours and 10 minutes from what I can see. Which means this race is very much mid-tier for how long it takes. As I hit the outside wall at Portier. But anyway. So the Fiat 500 and Honda S800 are now both 2 laps down. And I think I am about to put the Volkswagen a second lap down as well at this point. Who is behind the Mini Marcos at this point. Of course, the Mini Marcos finished 5th last time round at Opera Paris because, well, the Marcos was just not good in terms of conserving his tyres. And that was basically why he finished 5th at the previous race. However, Monaco is a different track, so I reckon there are probably going to be different results. As I now come to overlap the VW, who actually isn't too far behind the Marcos at this point, and the Fiat is now put a 3rd lap down, so all I have to do now is catch up to the Marcos, and then that will be most of the field 2 laps down. At least. Well, most of the field plus the Fiat, who was now 3 laps down. And getting a little push there from the Marcos from behind. And now that is most of the field 1 lap down. I think one of the places I would want to go to in Monaco would probably have to be the racing museum they most likely have. I couldn't tell you which part of the city that's in, but I think there is definitely a racing museum somewhere in Monaco where you can see a lot of old race cars that actually did race around here. And yes, to those of you who are fans of the Marvel Universe, you will of course know that Monaco also appeared in Iron Man 2. A scene which a lot of people consider to be clearly the most unrealistic scene in Marvel Universe history. But they basically chose to include Robert Downey Jr. driving an supposedly unlicensed F1 car for whatever reason. Although personally, I thought the movie was really good. Even I could tell that the scene itself was just so unrealistic. Because you would never, on your life, continue to hold a race when you know that there's been a big accident, and you also know that under the circumstances you are basically looking at two robot mechs essentially just battling it out while the race organisers are just busy being, well, nonchalant and just letting the race itself continue to go ahead. You know that would never happen in real life, because if that sort of thing was ever seen in real life, then you know the race would be stopped immediately. If there was that sort of battle. I refer now to the Robot Max battle, not the racing battles, if you're asking. I did actually watch a video one time that did do reference to that one bit, and it was also from someone who is clearly more of an F1 fan than what I am. I know bits and pieces, and I just went purple again, this time setting a 157 flat. It might also be because I am running on a lighter fuel load, and because, well, I am convinced in saying that fuel is not going to be an issue here. It might also help to say that when the AI pit, they technically pit in for tyres and fuel, whereas I just pit in for tyres at the moment. Fuel conservation is pretty much the key for me. At this point. So we're 22 laps in, and we're now 46 minutes into the race. And it looks like at this point I am going to put the Alfa Romeo a second lap down now. So I reckon I'm probably going to put him either 11 or 12 laps down by the time we're done here. I'm going to win this race by at least 10 laps, because that's just how much faster my car is. But either way, I still reckon we have got plenty of pace left over in the Jag. And trying to see if I can get a slipstream from him. A little bit of a bump there, but I do manage to clear him. That was a bit slower than the times I've been setting recently, but that's okay, because I am now 2 laps ahead of everyone else. And all that took me was 23 laps. As we are now on lap 24, and we're only precisely 2 laps away from halfway, if you include this one. So heading through Mirabeau once again, and now we head through Lowe's Hairpin. And at this point, I would say we are very much in a class of our own. As we head through the tunnel once again, and continuing to pretty much be on our unassailable lead as we have been for pretty much all races up to this point, because my car is just that much faster. I will say having lighter fuel loads do actually make your car go faster. If you think you have a good car in terms of fuel mileage then, and you really want to go all the way on basically a tank of gas that will go about as long as it will go, then I would say your choices either come between the Jaguar or probably the Lotus Elan. If you're wanting two cars that are good at saving fuel, then well, I'm using one of those primary examples. I think the Merc 300 SL also has good fuel mileage as well, if I'm not mistaken, when I looked on the GT fandom page. One of the keys to winning this event is having a car with good fuel mileage. Or if you just want to make this easy and basically just you know, upgrade the hell out of whatever car it is you're using, then that's fine. For some people, going long into what's essentially these endurance races is not for everyone. But if you just want to quite literally max out your car as much as you can, then well, that's also fine. As the VW makes his first pit stop, and I doubt he is going to beat the Marcos second time around. So, looks like from here, the pit stops are going to vary. But at this time, I am doing just fine, as now the Fiat comes in for his pit stop. I think this is now going to put him 4 laps down by the time we're done here. Of course, I will say, tyre wear is a bit of an issue here for the Jaguar, at least in terms of tyre longevity, but fuel saving is one of this car's greatest strengths, which when it comes to long drawn out endurance races, as the Fiat has now gone 4 laps down. When it comes to these fuel mileage based races, fuel mileage is a key advantage to have, because you know you're not going to take as long with the pit stops. Plus the other thing is, with race cars from this time period, they used to run with a lot more fuel than what they do today. And that's partly the reason as to why a lot of race cars back then basically were bombs on wheels, because they were carrying so much fuel. You could essentially say, with F1 cars of that time period, you basically were sitting in what essentially was a steel-plated coffin, because you were just that exposed to the engine bay as well as the fuel tank that if either something broke on the car or if you quite simply just made a mistake, there was a good possibility that your car would basically turn into a flaming projectile. Let alone if something broke on the car while you were still driving it, there was a definite possibility it still would have caught fire. Because that was a pretty common sight to see back in the 60s. And you do have to remember, this was at a time, of course, where safety was only just starting to become a thing. And not just with race cars, but I mean just with racetracks as well. I know a lot of fans at the time absolutely loathed the idea of their favourite races just being cancelled on safety grounds. But at the same time, had those races not been cancelled, then there's a good possibility that the improvements they made to a lot of the racetracks that we see today, especially a lot of the state-of-the-art racetracks that we technically still have today, then there's a good possibility that it wouldn't have been a common sight for drivers to basically head into a race weekend thinking that there was a possibility of saying at least one or two of them were basically going to die over the course of a season. But with major safety improvements taking place by the mid-80s, by the late 80s, and also with many other safety improvements coming over time over the course of the 90s and beyond, there is a good possibility that without a lot of the safety features that we see in pretty much all sanctioned sports today, there's a good possibility that a lot more drivers would have been dead. And I know that because it was pretty much commonplace back then to expect at least 2, sometimes even multiple drivers basically die over the course of a season. And I can definitely say that 1968 did prove to be a glaring example of why safety itself is taken a lot more seriously than what it was back then. I think there was at least 5 drivers that year who died that were present at the start of the F1 season. And I don't just refer, of course, to the obvious fatality of Jim Clark at Hockenheimring that year, and there was also the Frenchman Joe Schlasser, who was basically incinerated at that year's French Grand Prix, in arguably one of the most dangerous race cars ever built. Ironically, a race car that does have a 100% fatality rate. Basically, it was a race car that was built by the sorts of people who knew it was probably going to kill somebody, but yet because it was built by the French Honda factory, they didn't exactly take safety into consideration. And when that was the case, while the car itself was practically undrivable to the point where it was literally unsafe, and that was by 60 standards, the car was literally unsafe. And I think it was fair to say that following the death of Joe Schlasser, I think that probably was definitely something that under the circumstances shouldn't have been taken for granted. Of course, we know that these days that when it comes to most F1 cars with their monocoque chassis, they typically tend to be crash tested, and they also basically have to make sure with plenty of computer stats that the crashes themselves are survivable. And yes, I know every once in a while we still do hear about fatalities in motorsport, but sometimes that's just something you're going to hear about. But it's a lot less common today than what it was back then. I mean, in some cases it was probably safer to be an astronaut in the 60s than it was to be a racing driver. Especially if you were driving in 300 horsepowered Formula 1 cars, which I think was the amount of power they had back then, or near enough to 300 horsepower. It was fair to say that you really did have to be pretty much a daredevil to race in Formula 1 and somehow survive. It basically was pretty much a sport of gladiators during that time. It was like you were pretty much Roman gladiators in the lion's den. There's a good possibility that when you get in those dens, there's also a good possibility that at least one or two of those gladiators will likely die. That's just the equivalent of what F1 was back then. And I can assure you that under the circumstances, I know that safety itself has come a hell of a long way since then. And believe it or not, the last 100 lap race they had here at Monaco happened to be because of, ironically, another F1 fatality. Because it was here in 1967 where the much loved Ferrari driver Lorenzo Bandini had lost his life after crashing right before La Rascasse. And it honestly was a deadly crash as well, because the car itself had quite literally turned over whilst Bandini was still technically present in the car. It was a very gory scene, and I think it was fair to say that the television cameras had basically caught what was essentially the race car equivalent of a towering inferno, if not the towering inferno, because of just how big the fire was. It was a very gory scene at the time. And the one thing that made it even more ironic is the fact that since there was a tailwind coming from the TV helicopter at that time, and yes, the Monaco Grand Prix that year was televised, it was ironically the wind from a TV helicopter that quite literally caused the other side of the gas tank to be ruptured. And that was basically how, even though Bandini technically was pulled from the flaming wreck, that was basically how the car itself basically became a projectile from both sides of the car. I'm not going to explain anything else because I think I've probably explained enough about that fateful day. But I know it was partly because of that the Monaco Grand Prix was, in some cases, shortened to 80 laps for a few years after that. And then I think there was actually a period where the total number of laps was randomised. In some cases it was over 70 laps, and in other cases they had the race over, I think it was 80 laps if I'm not mistaken. It was a completely random period at the time for how many laps exactly Monaco had overall. But then I think it was around 2000 when they eventually settled for having, I think it was 78 laps. And that's where the race distance for Monaco has basically stuck ever since. But yeah, to put it simply, they probably knew that having Monaco for 80 laps was a more respectable distance than running it for 100 laps. Plus the other thing about the course was at that time, before the track was fitted with Armco barriers, there were often times where there wouldn't be any walls at all. And yes, there were definitely occasions where drivers did actually go into the Mediterranean for whatever reason. And there is actually one scene from the 1966 film Grand Prix that does actually show one car basically going into the Mediterranean, and that, under the circumstances, was technically caused by a gearbox failure. If you have seen the Grand Prix movie, and I refer to the one that was directed by John Frankenheimer and stars James Garner, then you will know that the movie itself does start at Monaco. Because there was also one time where Monaco did used to be the season opener. I think it's been that way on a handful of occasions where Monaco used to be the season opener. But yeah, to put it simply, Monaco does have a lot of history behind it. And I can certainly say that since the mid-60s, there have been a lot of safety improvements put in place. And not just with these, well, Armco barriers, but also other bits and pieces as well. Although, the Armco barriers were mainly enforced to basically stop drivers from crashing into the Mediterranean. I think there was even one case where Alberto Ascari actually went into the Mediterranean as well, down at that chicane which, as I said before, at the end of the tunnel straight that used to be quite literally just a flick in and out. But you know, there is that. So the Fiat 500 is now, I think, 4 laps down, and the Honda S800, if I recall correctly, is also 4 laps down at this point. I have kind of been distracted by mentioning bits and pieces about Monaco. But yeah, I mean, the best thing they really had for safety walls back then were hay bales. And they used to be around racetracks all the time. But aside from that, there wasn't really much else in the line of safety that did actually keep drivers on the track. And then it was around the late 60s when they actually decided that they needed to put these safety improvements in place. As the Fiat 500, I think, has now gone 5 laps down, if I recall correctly. Either 5 or 6 laps down. But at this point, I'm basically just turning laps. And just keeping this video going until I get to about the 50 lap mark. And then I can basically just focus on the remaining 49 laps after that. So it doesn't look like I can really conserve my fuel quite as well around here as I could around Opera Paris. And that's probably because the lap speed is slightly faster, but... And of course, this course is, well, slightly longer. But I think it is possible for me to probably go up to about, I would say, somewhere between lap 40 and lap 50. Although I probably will have to refill once I get to my next stop anyway. And then it can probably be after that when I top off my tank of gas for just a little more. That's basically the way I go about it. So, you know, there is that. But at this time, I'm just fine maintaining what I have. Which is probably the most I can ask for at this point. But yeah, the list of winners here at Monaco, it basically does read like a list of legends. I mean, you of course have Mr. Monaco himself, Graham Hill. I think it was Rudolf Caracciola who won the first ever Monaco Grand Prix that was run in 1929. At least I think it was Caracciola who won that race. Someone who at that time would go on to be a pre-war Grand Prix legend. Even though, as you might have guessed, he was German. But either way, he was still a legend. I think he won 10 times over the course of his pre-war Grand Prix career. So it is fair to say that Grand Prix racing did exist even back then. As I now put the Alfa Romeo 3 laps down, and all that took me was 34 laps to get there. So I reckon I'm probably going to win this by, I would say, 11 laps. Possibly 12, depending on how quick I am at the end. It'll be somewhere around that distance. Plus I did also take a day off from recording yesterday because, well, I got back from a concert in London the previous day. And if you're asking who it was I went to watch, well, believe it or not, I went to watch Imagine Dragons. When I was at a music concert in London. I gotta say, the food they served over there, it was exquisite. It really was, I think, some of the best stadium food I think I have probably ever tasted. As I now put the Honda S800 a 5th lap down, who I think is going to overlap the Fiat at some point before this is all said and done. And it looks as though I'm going to continue to hold on to my lead. I actually want to try and see how far I can go on this tank of fuel. So if I am going to do an extra stop, then that's probably just going to be the reason for it. I want to see how far I can actually go on this tank of gas without refueling. I figured that's actually something I should have experimented on. But yeah, I mean the additions of the Armco barriers, and eventually the concrete walls as well, they were hugely beneficial in terms of keeping the drivers safer. But if you're asking about how exactly we got to Monaco's current layout, well, the original Monaco circuit layout was basically used, although they did have a few layouts, but the layout that you know today, it wasn't until 1973 when they actually put in a lot of the major changes that you see today. Because there was also one time where the tunnel section used to just be a chute in and out, where you would basically go in one end of the tunnel and then a split second later you were just out of it. The tunnel section used to just be a flick in and out, and that was prior to 1973 when they made major construction changes, because that's pretty much when the long sweeping tunnel corner that we know today was built. And this chicane down here was added in the mid-80s, as I said before. And aside from that, the other changes they made in the early 70s included the swimming pool section, with the additions of the swimming pool bus stop section, as you see here, because, well, this essentially is a bus stop section, and also the two corners that make up La Rascasse at the end of the lap. All of these corners were added when the course itself was remodified in the 70s. So if you're asking just how long the swimming pool section has been there, it's been there for longer than you think. And it has also undergone a few other changes since then with, well, a few more modifications to certain corners here and there, but yeah, since the 70s, or at least the mid-80s I should say, Monaco has not really seen that many modifications. It's seen a few here and there, but it's not really seen that many modifications since the course was revamped in 1973. I think the last major change they made to this course in terms of layout was in, I think it was 2003, the last time they altered the Monaco circuit for whatever reason. And since then, well, the track has pretty much been unchanged. It was only minor tweaks they really made to certain corners, and that was about it. I should also mention that, ironically, Juan Pablo Montoya won at Monaco 1 year driving for Williams. When they were running BMW engines, and, well, their liveries at that time were very much reminiscent to the Brabham liveries of the 80s when they were technically running BMW engines. Although BMW these days isn't really involved in F1 anymore. I think they have involvements in other racing frontiers. They practically did prove themselves in F1 long ago anyway. As I'm now putting the Volkswagen, I think a 4th lap down if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure I have now put the VW precisely 4 laps down at this point of the race. Well, either 3 or 4 laps down. I think it's probably 4, if I remember correctly. Although I would appreciate it if someone actually is keeping tabs on what the running order is. Because unfortunately this game does not have a leaderboard tab. And the other thing that really doesn't help is the fact that when you finish a race, you only get the best part of about 15 seconds to really see what the finishing order is. So unless anyone is really close to the finish line, then basically you have almost no choice but to just, well, wait for 15 seconds, see what happens, and then just pretty much just move on to the next one. I'll admit, it kind of sucks to say that they made the fade out mechanism without exactly telling you what the racing intervals were. That is one advantage I will give to the 3 previous games that this one doesn't have, with its Seiko timing screen. I kind of wish that was the case. Well, I can probably see how far this car can go on a tank of gas later on, because my tyres are getting worn out again, and I know that the grip is not going to last much longer. I am basically trying to do 14 lap stints here, so I reckon the pit stops we'll probably do is either 6 or 7. I reckon it will probably be 7, because, well, there will be a point in the closing laps where I will switch over to the softs. I don't think I'll really need to stop off for fuel at the end, but I will need to stop off for tyres, because tyres is one thing I need. So coming round now to completing what will be lap 40 of race 3. So up to this point of the race, and I know I have not been giving updates up to this point of the race, but up to this point of the race now, I am currently 3 laps ahead of the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint, who is 3 laps down. Then it is the Mini Marcos, who is 3rd, ahead of the Volkswagen Carmen Gear, who both run 4 laps down. Then it's the Honda S800, who at this point is currently running 5 laps down. And at the back it is the Fiat 500, who is currently now, I think, 7 laps down, if I recall correctly. Either 7 or 8 laps down. I'm practically overlapping the Fiat 500 so much, it's honestly becoming hard to remember how many laps ahead I am. And it's also even harder when you know you don't have a ticker or a fucking lap counter to really tell you how many laps ahead of your competition you are. I like to know these things, but I will say that with this game, it doesn't exactly reveal those. I understand why they put in the fade-out mechanism, probably because some people were just wanting the race to be over by the time they got to this game, but I actually do prefer those times when you could see just how far ahead you really were of your opponents at the end of a race. And that was also true in the endurance races as well. Although then again, when we get down to the endurance races, that will basically just be a case of me counting precisely just how many laps ahead I am of everyone else. And the understeer is kicking in again. Although it would have been nice to know just what laps exactly the AI were running on. I think that was something they did put in later games following this one. I know that might just be a me thing, but I actually do wish that they had the and yep, I went too deep. Looks like this is going to be my pit-in lap again, because otherwise my tyres are going to be completely fucked. But either way, we still seem to be right where we need to be, which is out front and continuing our ever salient domination. In spite of the understeer problems I get from my tyres just being, well, turbo fucked, basically. So after 41 laps, nearing 42 laps, we will have done 3 stints in this car. And I think I could actually go far enough to potentially make my next stint on this tank of gas if I really wanted to. I think that might actually be a risk worth taking, from what I can see, because I am doing a pretty good job in terms of fuel conservation. So you know what? I think I'm actually going to try and see if I can physically empty the tank, or get close enough to emptying the tank. So that is now 3 pit stops done. This car might be hard on tyres, but it does a really good job in terms of conserving fuel. And I think I can actually make my next pit stop with enough gas on board, because I will be about, I would say, at least a few laps up on being, well, able to get to the end of this next run no problem, as I am re-overlapping both the VW and the Marcos, putting them back to 4 laps down. And so I have decided I'm basically going to just run it out on this tank of gas, because I reckon at this point we've got a pretty good car, and if we have a pretty good car, then it means we've got a car that can possibly push this fuel tank out to our next pit stop. I reckon we're probably good enough to do less than 60 laps on a full tank of fuel with this car. Although it'll probably be, by the time we get to the next stint, that I won't necessarily have enough fuel to realistically make a charge for, and gone too deep again. I think it will be around 60 laps that we'll probably run on a full tank of gas if we really wanted to, but at this time I basically just want to get to my next pit stop window, and then it's after that when I will be in the window of refueling my car. And I'll probably put in half a tank as well, because this car is just so good when it comes to fuel mileage. But yeah, you have plenty of great drivers who have won here at Monaco. I should also mention there was a brief stint where Nico Rosberg also proved to be the Monaco master, because he won here 3 years in a row, one time. And yes, all of those years he did prove to beat his Mercedes teammate Lewis Hamilton. Because prior to 2016, Lewis had only won at Monaco once. And since then I think he's gone on to win the race precisely... Yeah, I think it's only 3 times that Lewis has won here at Monaco, if I'm not mistaken. Because the other race winners that this place has had since 2016 have been Sebastian Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo, Lewis again. 2020 was cancelled due to obvious reasons, and then 21 it was Max. And I think in 22 I think it was Max again. 23 was definitely Max. And then I believe it was 24 when I believe it was Charles Leclerc that won here. Although if we're being more specific, for the sake of English, it would technically be Charles Leclerc. But whatever. But yeah, there have been lots of other drivers who have won here as well. I mean, you of course have Michael Schumacher, there's also David Coulthard, Fernando Alonso. I think Kimi Raikkonen also won here 1 year as well, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, there was also Juan Pablo Montoya, Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna. Jackie Stewart had also won here a fair number of times. And of course I couldn't forget the likes of Fangio, as well as Moss. And of course, as I said before, the aforementioned Graham Hill, who prior to Senna winning here 6 times basically was the King of Monaco. And also because ironically Graham had a lot of his finest achievements in Monaco. And that did also include his marriage as well. As in Damon Hill's dad, he did actually get married here in Monaco. So I think it's pretty fair to say there's more than enough reasons to say why Graham Hill has more than likely earned the status of being called Mr. Monaco. I should also mention that by November 29th of this year, it will be 50 years since his passing. And there is actually a recently released documentary that is based around the life and struggles of Damon Hill and just about everything that the Hill family went through after Graham's passing. It's honestly the sort of thing that most of us could not even bear to imagine going through. It's very tragic in a way, but I will say that it's also, ironically, what you could call a case of redemption. But yeah, I think you probably should watch the Hill documentary if you get round to it. Or if you're not, or if documentaries aren't your thing and you're more into biographies, then there's also Damon Hill's biography, Watching the Wheels. If you want to find out the nitty-gritty details of just about everything you had to experience as a kid. Because Damon was around to see F1 during arguably its most dangerous era. And there is also a reason why there's, ironically, a documentary that is entitled Grand Prix The Killer Years. The supposed golden age of Formula 1 that did also prove to be its deadliest stage. It's honestly the sort of thing that you would never see happen with F1 broadcasts today, because of how much more dangerous it was back then. But anyway, overlapping the Honda S800 now for, I think this is now the 7th time I've overlapped the Honda, if I recall correctly. And we're also not too far from hitting 600 miles as well. Did I also mention that Nico Hülkenberg ironically has a house in Monaco? As I now put the Fiat 500 9 laps down, I think is what it is up to this point. It's either 8 or 9 laps down. It's definitely around that area. I'm gonna say 9 laps because I'm overlapping the Fiat quicker than I can count. I'm pretty sure it is 9 laps now. But if anyone in the comments section actually is keeping up with the amount of times I've overlapped the AI, then I would appreciate it in the comments section if you were going to possibly keep me monitored on how many times the field has been overlapped up to this point. I would certainly appreciate it. if possible. As we're closing in on the halfway point. I would assume the main reason why this race is 99 laps is because it is in reference to what the Monaco Grand Prix used to have in terms of its lap distance, which, as I said before, was 100 laps up until the late 60s, when it went through a phase of technically just going through basically an RNG mode of how many laps precisely the race was going to run. But then eventually they settled with 78 laps, which is where the race has technically been since the early 2000s. I think that was when they settled with 78 laps. But I could be wrong. So, the Alfa Romeo is now 4 laps down, and we are just 1 lap away from reaching the halfway point. So through Lowe's hairpin once again, and the replay has now finished recording. Although the main reason why I am doing the full championship is so I can record my replays. I'll probably get 2 of these 4 races uploaded before I head away, but as for the other 2 races, well, I'm still working that out. But hopefully I will manage to get something worked out sooner rather than later, if possible. But at this time, I'm just trying to record the races and make sure that I get this over with. So then, in terms of my replay shots, I have something to do. And in terms of the thumbnail shots I'll use, well, basically I'll just be using the same thumbnail shot for both parts of the race, but just with different numbers, if that makes any sense. So, we're closing in now on lap 50, and we are 49 laps away from the end. As soon as we finish this lap, we will pretty much be halfway there. We've made some good progress so far in this first half. It's taken me just over 100 minutes to get to this point now. I have set a few sub 2 minute lap times, as the Fiat now comes in for what I think is his 3rd pit stop. Although since he is now, I believe, either 8 or 9 laps down, probably 8, from what I can see. I'm now putting the VW Carmen gear 5 laps down. And we are closing in on the 600 mile mark, which we probably should see in a few laps. And so we continue to hold on to our lead, and the tank is almost empty, so I doubt I'm going to go much longer on this stint than what I'm already doing. So through the final corner we go. Can I set a new fastest lap? Not quite, but either way, that was part 1 of this race. And now that we have done 50 laps, now it's time for us to get on with the second half, where we do another 50 laps, give or take. On now to part 2.